Today is Wednesday, the 1st of December, and it's the third day of the Conference of Parties here in Cancun. The major issue, particularly within the developing countries, that arose last evening in the G77 was an issue that has been brewing for a number of sessions, namely, who is the most vulnerable group of countries. The Bali Action Plan agreed in COP13 names three groups of countries, namely the least developed countries, small island developing states, and countries in Africa that are prone to drought and floods. That numbers around 100 countries, but it excludes quite a large number of countries, particularly in Latin America and parts of Asia and other parts of Africa as well. And some of these countries, led by Pakistan, Philippines, Costa Rica, Colombia, have been making the case, which is a very genuine case, that they are also extremely vulnerable. Indeed, Pakistan had devastating floods earlier this year, which demonstrates the vulnerability of the country. So it's very true that many other countries that are not included in those three groups are also extremely vulnerable. At the same time, some countries like Saudi Arabia also claim to be vulnerable to not to the impacts of climate change, but to the impacts of what are called response measures, namely mitigation measures that may affect their exports. This issue is basically within the G77 in China, or the developing countries group, and it is causing a lot of bad blood and dissension and arguments. Last evening in the G77, there was a lot of arguments within the G77, and they cannot reach agreement. So this morning, in the Climate Action Network NGO newsletter ECO, the NGOs have put forward a position or a solution to this problem, which is the following. They say that all countries are vulnerable, and that has become very clear. Even developed countries, even the United States is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So vulnerability is not the issue. The issue is how to allocate resources for adaptation. And that is a separate issue from vulnerability and should be treated separately. And the suggestion is that a resource allocation formula for adaptation be developed. And this cannot be done in the larger group. It should be done in a small group. And a small group that is representative already exists. This is the Adaptation Fund Board. So the suggestion is to allow the Adaptation Fund Board, when it meets immediately after the COP in Cancun, to take this issue up and bring back with suggestions to the COP next year in COP17 in Durban in South Africa.